imagined futures, which I don't want to conflate with Enlightenment notions of futurity, yet I don't want to entirely repudiate them either. Imagined futures are, it seems to me, necessary ways of navigating the structural cruelties of the present, the post-colonial, post-slavery present. These imagined alternatives can, of course, be narrowly confined to specific individuals, communities, institutions, but sometimes these collective political imaginations, and these are the ones that are most interesting to me, that they address much larger frameworks. The relationship between what one hopes for and the transformed conditions that are necessary to enable the realization of that hope is negotiated, it seems to me, in art and in political praxis. I join Maria do Mar Castro in talking about the meaning of the term utopia. I like the idea of thinking of utopia as no place rather than as a better place, because of course the two meanings, depending on how you spell it in the Greek, are affixed to the term. I like the idea of thinking of utopia as no place rather than a better place, because it does not allow us to forget that we produce the present as an intersection between the past and the future. It retains a space of negativity, a vantage point that allows us to critically question the present. When I think about the prescience of an artist like Octavia Butler, whose work, of course, is linked to Afrofuturism, I realize that sometimes imagined places are efficaciously represented not so much as better places, but rather as the acknowledgement of the more complex frameworks that help us to imagine futures. I think that it is especially important to emphasize the work of the imagination as exploring relationalities that may not yet be conceptualizable through our existing vocabularies. That no place, then, is the negativity of the aesthetic. At the same time, I want to acknowledge that this no place once only existed in the collective imaginations of people standing up to colonial powers, people dedicated to ending the institution of slavery. That no place is our lived reality. In a sense, we inhabit that no place. We are the materialized imaginations of our forebears. Those who fought slavery, those who insisted on freedom from European colonialism, had a collective vision. And in sometimes convoluted ways, that collective vision contributed to the production of the present. Activist intellectuals who have been thinking about the ways that the past, posited as a past to be overcome by freedom struggles, has surreptitiously determined a future that seems incapable of extricating itself from that past. And David Scott was talking about this relationship to the past yesterday. But it seems to me that this is the genealogical relation that abolitionists discover in the link between mass incarceration in the present and the core of punishment at the heart of slavery. When Michelle Alexander asserts that there were more Black men imprisoned and under the control of the criminal justice system at the beginning of the 21st century than there were Black men enslaved in 1850. It is not so much to argue that prisons have replaced slavery, but rather to point out that there is a relationship between the social, economic, political work of slavery and the neoliberal conditions that create racialized surplus populations, conditions that exploit those on the margins of capitalist production in the latter 20th and early 21st century for a failure to integrate themselves into a system that has no room for them, and ultimately also for their capacity to produce profit in other ways. And this is related to the capitalist production of waste about which Françoise Vergès was speaking this afternoon. This is certainly not the freedom that the enslaved imagined. But it is precisely the only freedom that is authorized by persisting and further developing conditions of global capitalism. Contemporary abolitionists suggest, and this is the utopian dimension of the anti-prison and anti-police work, it seems to me. They suggest that to myopically focus on specific institutions and target them for reform is precisely to reproduce the conditions that strengthen these institutions and make them more permanent, because the reformers never think outside of the contours of the institution. Better police, better prisons. But the question abolitionists raise is, how can society be refashioned so that it no longer needs to rely on the institutionalized violence of the police and prisons for its primary security?